So welcome to this week's Optimum Health Clinic Facebook Live. And this week I wanted to build a little bit on some of the themes we touched on in last week's Facebook Live, where I was talking about the importance of kind of having the building blocks in place and those fundamentals. And it struck me that a kind of next step from that is also the importance of staying consistent with our daily practices. So it's almost like we recognize those fundamentals are important. How do you actually put those fundamentals into action? So you've identified, I'm not doing the fundamentals, or I need to put in place more of those fundamentals. But how do you actually get consistent in terms of cultivating the habits and the daily practices that you need to change what's going on? We can recognize the importance, for example, of being in a healing state. We can recognize that we need to use some of the fundamentals to do that, but we can struggle to build the habits and the practices on a daily basis that are actually going to drive those changes. So there's a few words I wanted to say about practices, kind of why they're important and how you can be successful in being consistent in using them. So one of the key things here is that if you want to change something that is challenging and difficult to change, rarely is it just a moment of insight, or rarely is it that you do something a few times and then the change happens. It normally needs a consistency, and it needs a kind of a habit of following through on doing something on a daily basis. And I did a video a few videos ago where I talked about the 5 Ps, talked about patience, practice, persistence, perseverance, and precision. So that's a big part of how we get these kind of habits and practices in place. We need to make sure that we're using the right practices at the right time. Something that I've said in other places is the breakthrough at one stage becomes the limitation at the next stage. So it may be the case that one of the practices that you're using was a significant breakthrough at a certain point. It's like maybe it was like the thing which moved you from point A to point B. But now you're trying to move from point D to point E, and the thing that moved you before can sometimes not only be the right thing to move us forwards, but it can actually be the very thing which is causing us to be stuck in our progression moving forwards. And so we need to keep on reflecting back to ensure that the practices that we're using are the right ones, not for the stage where we were before, but for the stage at this point in the future going forwards. One of the things that you can notice with people is that there are certain practices that will tend to be easier for certain people to follow through with. So if, for example, we are someone that is naturally good at detail, and we're naturally good at kind of being, kind of remembering to do things like taking supplements on a daily basis may come fairly easily to us. Like we remember to do it, we're good at organizing it, we're good at kind of taking the right things at the right times, and that kind of is naturally lends itself to our comfort zone. But it may be that actually doing meditation, being able to slow down, be calm, be connected to ourselves, be aware of our breath, is really challenging and really difficult for us. So our tendency will then be to put our emphasis on the things which are familiar and the things that we find are easier to do, and to be less consistent with the things which are the challenge. Something that I've found, certainly in my life, which has been a really helpful strategy to use, has been to keep trying to look for my blind spots. So to look at the things where there are repetitive mistakes or repetitive patterns that happen in my life. And of course, it's easy to go, when it comes to that thing, I'm just really unlucky. Or when it comes to that thing, other people always seem to screw up and be the ones that cause the issues. But normally, if there are habits and patterns that repeat in our lives, normally we are the common denominator that's behind that. And so if we can see that the areas which are either the blind spots or the areas that are perhaps less comfortable, that it's easier to do what we want rather than do what we need, often they can be the areas that can be important to start to target some practices towards actually cultivating and creating change. remembering what I was saying in the 5 Ps, that we need to have that persistence, perseverance, and those pieces that go with that. So once we've established the practices which are the right ones to be doing, and as I say, they may not be the ones that feel the most familiar, they may not be the ones that are our kind of natural kind of leaning, but as I say, once we've established what is appropriate, we need to set some goals and some intentions around that. The first few ever Facebook Lives that I did, I talked a bit about sustainable goal setting. So you can go back to OHC Live 1 and 2, will be a good place to dip in a bit more about that. But once we've set the goals, we need to set a sustainable focus around it. And that might be for a week, it might be for a couple of weeks, and then to reassess. So the tendency can be that we set a goal and we're over ambitious. We think, right, I'm going to do this for the next 3 months. I'm going to meditate for an hour every day, and it's not sustainable. And then what ends up happening is we end up not being able to follow through. And then we end up with more evidence that we can't do the things we need to do, and it ends up being more negative than positive in terms of supporting our path forwards. So we want to set goals that are definitely achievable. We want to set goals which are relatively short windows of time. We want to set goals around, I'm giving you the bits from the first few Facebook Lives here, but we want to set goals which are not about activity, not about how much we do, but are about the way that we do that activity or the practices that support us. And then we need to reassess when we get to that point. It might be a week, might be 2 weeks or whatever, to make sure that it's the right practice at the right time, being done for the right amount of time in the right way, and not being afraid to shake up and change what we're doing, but also not getting sucked into just constantly chopping and changing and not having any consistency and follow through. So there needs to be a kind of balancing of, in a sense, having enough self-awareness to recognize, is it that I'm resistant to doing more of this because it's challenging me and it's the right thing to be doing? Or is it that I'm resistant because that's the information from my intuition or from my unconscious that's telling me that actually this is not the right thing for me to be doing and I need to observe that? So there's a balance here. I also would say when it comes to being proactive in terms of practices, so let's say you've determined some practices around meditation, or defined some practices around taking supplements, or being, doing stop process, or all the other things, many things it may be, that you also recognize that there needs to be pauses along the way. And what I mean by that is, in the kind of normal working life, people that don't have MECFS, people work 5 days a week and have 2 days off. People work 48 weeks a year and have 4 weeks off, or whatever it may be. That there are periods where we shift gear in terms of what we're doing. So when it comes to putting in place practices, we also need to make sure that we're not so habituated around the practices that we then end up with a kind of rebellion from our inner child, which is, I'm completely sick of doing this practice, and then you end up kind of almost sabotaging what you're doing because there's not that kind of those periods of pause and periods of break in the process. So I would recommend, if it's practice like taking supplements, you probably need to be doing it daily, and that's a bit different. But if it's things like having a meditation practice, maybe you do it 5 days a week. It's helpful between periods of setting goals to have a few days or a week or two holiday from that. So you're not always in a mode of doing practices, focusing on recovery, have to change things, that you also have periods where you let things breathe. You have periods where you leave yourself alone, and then you can reassess and come back with a fresh perspective in terms of what needs to be done. But ultimately, having the right practices in place in the right way at the right time is crucial to cultivating sustainable change. And if you don't have those things in place to cultivate sustainable change, then it all just becomes things in your head that you could be doing, you should be doing, but they're not actually driving the habits that drive the change that you need to be doing. So I hope that's been useful. Just a comment as well, if you are looking to go deeper into getting sustainable habits and practices that you're using, Conscious Transformation is starting again in a couple of weeks. It's certainly the last time it will run this year. It runs once or twice a year. It may be the last time that I do it for a while. Again, I'm still looking at schedule for next year. It's the best offering that I have in terms of me working with a group of people working one-on-one. In fact, it's the only offering that I have that I coach people in a small group. We particularly focus around cultivating the right habits and putting them in place consistently and looking at the things that get in the way of that. So the ways that we tend to sabotage ourselves when we're looking to make sustainable change. So if this video in the last few days has been resonating, that would be an excellent place to go deeper into that. You can find information at conscioustransformation.co.uk. If you're on our newsletter, you'll also see that a link coming out in the newsletter as well. So I hope that video has been useful. I look forward to talking with you guys same sort of time, same place next week. And feel free to share your experiences around setting habits and putting practices in place in the comments below. And hi to everyone's been commenting. Hi Julie, hi John, hi Rachel. Thanks for joining me, and I will talk to you again next week. Bye bye for now.